There's two main conflicting views of Columbus. In grade school, we are taught of Columbus, the discoverer of the Americas and great historical figure. Then many later in life are taught a more negative perspective on Columbus, that he brought disease and wiped out the indigenous populations. Fortunately, there's a local place and person suited to paint a realistic picture of Columbus and debunk some myths. I spoke with Bob Cameron, director of the Columbus Chapel in Boalsburg, in a Q&A session. In your opinion, what's the reality of the person Columbus and what he did, his impact on our lives?
That question we get asked on a weekly basis. And it's one of those things I try to explain to people. One, we have to be careful not to place our 21st century mores on what took place in the 15th century. And that's something, from our standpoint, a much more barbaric time. I mean, we look at things like slavery, a horrendous institution, but unfortunately, slavery, which is still alive and well today in many parts of the world, slavery was going on long before the time of Moses. So again, we have to always put this in the context of the period of history that it's in.
So in your opinion then, what is the reality of Columbus in terms of, if you had to sort of do a pro-con sheet mapping that out very, very briefly, where would you place Columbus in what his actual contributions were, and some of the good things and some of the bad things that are true to today?
Well, certainly it is the good, the bad, and the ugly. Again, like anyone in history, and especially looking back that far. It's true, the Europeans brought diseases with them that wiped out a high percentage of the Native American population. But at the same time, we have to realize when Marco Polo opened up the Silk Route, back across the Silk Route came the plague, which wiped out a major portion of the Europeans. So again, these things were not peculiar to Columbus, although today many people want to blame him for that. I prefer to focus on what I think are two of the great accomplishments of Christopher Columbus. One, of course, for Christians, he brought Christianity to the New World. Now, again, lots of issues, again, with that. But one of my focus, I love to eat. And so if viewers love Italian food, well, say thanks to Christopher Columbus. Columbus causes the greatest exchange of agricultural products the world had ever seen before and has ever seen since. Many products that we take for granted, the Europeans didn't have, and vice versa. There's
been much talk about Leif Erikson, the Viking. Did Columbus actually discover America as it is today?
Well, again, obviously there was a huge population of humans living in the Americas. And so from a European standpoint, certainly Columbus came to another part. The Vikings preceded him. But again, Columbus's legacy in many respects is what he did with agriculture and how he brought these species here, how he changed the cuisines of the world in doing so.
What's one of the main species that Columbus brought to the United States or to the Americas?
He brings from the old world horses. And so, and of course, the subsequent conquistadors bring horses, and they're released, which completely changes the way of life for the Native American on the plains.
Many people think that Columbus thought that the earth was flat and that he was a new voyager in seeing what was left of the other side of the world. He thought maybe he would fall off the earth. Talk about how that really is not the case.
Oh, it's an incredible fairy tale that's continued to be taught in schools today. In fact, right behind me, there is a book, an early edition of Washington Irving's History of Christopher Columbus. Now, Washington Irving was a great fictional writer with Sleepy Hollow, etc. He was a horrendous history writer, and we still base many things on those false information. So, long before Columbus, Eratosthenes, a Greek living in Egypt, calculated the circumference of the earth so precisely that not until we put a satellite in space did we have a more accurate measurement. The Europeans of Columbus' time, the educated, knew the world was round. Columbus did not think he was falling off the edge of the earth.
So that's, yeah, everybody knew at that point basically, or most people were aware that the earth was round in some way, right?
Well, again, the educated people of Europe, and one of the things that, again, Columbus should be given credit for is he maps out the prevailing winds of the Atlantic Ocean. That's a huge accomplishment.